Daniel Shalev was missing. Elias Haddad was dead. Ghost Hand had vanished. The world was unraveling around a single question. Was the Israeli Prime Minister a fugitive war criminal or the victim of the greatest political betrayal in modern history? For years, the name Daniel Shalev commanded both admiration and fear. As the Prime Minister of Israel, he was known for his iron-fisted leadership, his aggressive policies, and his refusal to bow to international pressure. His supporters saw him as a warrior, a protector of his nation in an increasingly hostile world. His critics, however, viewed him as a dangerous authoritarian, a man who ruled with secrecy and force, leaving destruction in his wake. But despite the controversy surrounding him, no one had ever been able to hold him accountable, until now. In early 2025, an explosive report from Amnesty International sent shockwaves across the globe. The human rights organization had been gathering intelligence for years, collecting testimonies, classified documents, and satellite images that suggested Shalev had been involved in covert military operations that violated international law. What had started as a quiet investigation had quickly escalated into something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The most damning evidence centered around a military operation conducted in a disputed region. Officially, the operation had been classified as an anti-terrorist raid, a necessary strike against extremists planning attacks on Israeli civilians. But Amnesty International's findings told a different story. Through leaked documents and first-hand accounts, investigators uncovered proof that the raid had not only resulted in the deaths of dozens of unarmed civilians, but that it had been planned with full knowledge of the collateral damage. The government had deliberately misrepresented the event, altering reports and suppressing any information that contradicted the official narrative. It wasn't just the deaths themselves that made this case so alarming. It was the extent of the cover-up. Satellite images taken before and after the operation showed entire residential blocks reduced to rubble, areas that had previously been identified as civilian zones. Amnesty International's legal experts reviewed classified communications between military officials and found orders to destroy evidence and silence potential whistleblowers. A pattern of systematic suppression emerged, pointing directly to the highest levels of government. As more evidence surfaced, Amnesty International knew they had a historic case on their hands. Never before had they compiled such an overwhelming body of proof against a sitting head of state. This wasn't just a case of political corruption or misconduct, it was a crime against humanity. The organization moved swiftly, compiling a formal demand for Shalev's arrest and submitting its findings to the International Criminal Court. The request was unprecedented, and the implications were massive. If the ICC agreed to pursue the case, Shalev would be the first Israeli leader to face such charges, placing his government in direct confrontation with international law. News of the report spread like wildfire. Within hours, media outlets across the world broadcasted the shocking allegations. Global leaders weighed in, some expressing their concerns, others remaining silent. Protests erupted in major cities, with activists demanding justice for the victims. In Tel Aviv, thousands marched through the streets holding signs calling for accountability, while others gathered in fierce defense of their prime minister, dismissing the accusations as propaganda. Inside the halls of government, chaos erupted. Shalev's closest advisors convened in emergency meetings, strategizing damage control. The Prime Minister himself remained composed in public, delivering a televised statement dismissing the report as a politically motivated attack. He accused Amnesty International of bias, claiming that their so-called evidence was nothing more than misinformation designed to destabilize his leadership. His administration refused to acknowledge the allegations, insisting that no wrongdoing had occurred. But behind closed doors there was fear. Intelligence officials scrambled to assess the damage. Were there more leaks? Had insiders betrayed them? How much did Amnesty International really know? And most importantly, How could they contain the situation before it spiraled out of control? What had started as an investigation was now a full-blown international crisis. The world was watching, and the pressure on Shalev was mounting. What happened next would determine not just his future, but the future of an entire nation. As the accusations against Prime Minister Daniel Shalev gained global attention, something unsettling began to unfold. The investigation that had seemed airtight, built on documents and testimony from key witnesses, suddenly faced an unexpected roadblock. Those witnesses started disappearing. At first, the incidents seemed like tragic coincidences. A prominent human rights lawyer involved in compiling the report was killed in a car accident on his way to a press conference. The vehicle had lost control on a busy highway, slamming into a concrete barrier. Authorities ruled it an accident, but activists suspected otherwise. A week later, Dr. Elias Haddad, the forensic expert who had verified civilian casualties from the military operation, was found drowned in his bathtub. His death was labeled a suicide, but those who knew him rejected the idea. He had been outspoken about his findings, determined to see justice served. Would he really take his own life just as his work was gaining traction? Then, the disappearances began. A former intelligence officer who had agreed to testify before the International Criminal Court went missing without a trace. His family reported that he had left home one evening for a routine walk and never returned. Security footage showed him stepping out of his apartment complex, but after that he simply vanished. No body, no clues, just gone. Journalists covering the case started to feel the pressure as well. A foreign reporter investigating Amnesty International's claims received a direct threat, an anonymous email warning her to stop digging if she valued her life. A few days later, her home was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her laptop, containing sensitive research on the case, was completely wiped. It was clear that someone was trying to send a message. These events sent shockwaves through the human rights community. Activists had faced intimidation before, but never on such an organized, systematic scale. The timing was too precise, the pattern too deliberate to be coincidental. Speculation grew that a shadow network of operatives was working behind the scenes to silence anyone who could testify against Shalev. But proving it was another matter. Meanwhile, Shalev's administration remained defiant. His spokesperson dismissed the idea that the government had anything to do with the disappearances or deaths, calling the accusations paranoid conspiracy theories. They pointed out that accidents happen, that people choose to disappear for personal reasons, and that there was no direct evidence linking the government to any of these events. But the denials only fueled suspicion. As fear spread, some witnesses went into hiding, afraid that they might be next. Anonymous sources who had initially provided evidence to Amnesty International suddenly retracted their statements, claiming they had been misquoted or misunderstood. Others left the country entirely, seeking refuge in places where they believed they would be safe from whatever force was at work. Despite the setbacks, Amnesty International refused to back down. They called for an independent investigation into the sudden wave of deaths and disappearances, but international bodies were slow to respond. Some governments hesitated to challenge Israel directly, wary of the political consequences. Others quietly withdrew their support, unwilling to get involved in what was quickly becoming one of the most controversial human rights cases in modern history. The case was no longer just about war crimes. It had transformed into a high-stakes battle between those seeking justice and those determined to bury the truth. The evidence was clear, yet one by one the people who could confirm it were being silenced. The message was chilling. Anyone who stood against the most powerful man in the country was at risk. But even as the threats grew, Amnesty International knew that turning back now would mean surrendering to fear. The fight had only just begun. As key witnesses vanished and fear spread, many believed the case against Daniel Shalev was collapsing. Amnesty International had built a compelling case, but with no one left to testify, it seemed increasingly difficult to move forward. Just as the momentum appeared to wane, a new figure emerged from the shadows, an anonymous hacker known only as Ghost Hand. Ghost Hand was a mystery. No one knew their identity, location, or even their true motives. Some suspected they were a rogue intelligence officer. Others believed they were a collective of whistleblowers working from within the system. What was certain, however, was that they had access to highly classified information. One night, without warning, Ghost Hand released a trove of encrypted emails between Shalev and his closest military advisors. The content was damning. The emails revealed direct orders from Shalev himself, orders to suppress protests, manipulate casualty reports, and authorize the elimination of individuals who posed a threat to his administration. In one exchange, a top general assured the Prime Minister that the issue has been handled, referring to a journalist who had mysteriously disappeared. Another email detailed a coordinated effort to discredit Amnesty International, with officials discussing ways to plant false evidence that would undermine the credibility of the investigation. The leaks sent shockwaves around the world. News outlets dissected every message, every word, exposing the depth of corruption within Shalev's government. Social media erupted, with millions demanding immediate action. The emails weren't just an embarrassment, they were evidence of crimes. Human rights organizations renewed their calls for Shalev's arrest, and international leaders, many of whom had previously remained silent, began publicly condemning his actions. With undeniable proof now in the open, the International Criminal Court had no choice but to act. Within days, prosecutors at The Hague announced they were moving forward with formal charges. An arrest warrant was being prepared, and legal experts debated the unprecedented challenge of detaining a sitting world leader. Would Israel cooperate? Would Shalev resist? The world watched with anticipation, but even as justice seemed within reach, unexpected complications arose. Shalev and his administration claimed that the leaked emails were fabrications, part of a coordinated cyber attack designed to frame him. His government accused foreign adversaries of orchestrating the hack, suggesting that intelligence agencies from rival nations had manipulated the documents to create a scandal. He called Amnesty International puppets of international propaganda, dismissing their claims as nothing more than an attempt to destabilize his leadership. Despite the overwhelming evidence, a portion of the public believed him. His supporters argued that the leaked emails could not be trusted, that they were taken out of context or even completely falsified. His legal team mobilized, preparing a defense that painted him as the victim of a global conspiracy. With Israel's powerful security forces behind him, arresting Shalev would be no simple task. Behind the scenes, tensions escalated. Amnesty International knew that with every passing day, Shalev and his allies would work to erase more evidence, silence more dissenters, and fortify their defenses. Some feared that if international forces failed to act swiftly, the Prime Minister might go underground or seek asylum in a country that would protect him. The longer he remained in power, the harder it would be to bring him to justice. As the Habi situation reached a boiling point, another unexpected event sent the world into further chaos. Ghost Hand resurfaced, this time with an ominous message. They claimed to have one final piece of evidence, something that would end all debate and leave no room for denial. But before they could release it, their accounts went dark. Their websites vanished. Their encrypted communication channels were suddenly shut down. Had they been caught? Silenced? Or had they gone into hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike again? As governments, activists, and intelligence agencies scrambled to uncover the truth, one thing became clear. Whoever Ghost Hand was, they had become the most wanted individual on the planet. And whatever information they held could change everything. With the International Criminal Court moving forward with charges and Ghost Hand's explosive leaks shaking the global stage, the pressure on Daniel Shalev had reached its peak. Amnesty International's demand for his arrest was no longer just a call for justice. It was a race against time. The walls were closing in, and rumors swirled that the Prime Minister was making plans to flee before the warrant could be executed. For years, Shalev had been a master strategist, always staying one step ahead of his enemies. If there was one thing his allies and adversaries agreed on, it was that he would never allow himself to be taken without a fight. Intelligence sources began picking up chatter about secret meetings between high-ranking Israeli officials and foreign contacts. Private jets were seen idling at undisclosed airstrips. Offshore bank transactions spiked, with millions of dollars being funneled into untraceable accounts. It was clear that Shalev was preparing for something big. Meanwhile, the Israeli government was in chaos. Shalev's most loyal supporters within his administration urged him to resist, calling the ICC's actions an attack on national sovereignty. Hardliners within the military discussed plans to shield the Prime Minister from extradition, even if it meant a direct confrontation with international forces. On the other hand, a growing faction within his own government had begun distancing themselves from him, fearful of the political and economic fallout his arrest could bring. Several high-ranking officials secretly reached out to foreign embassies, discussing possible exit strategies that would allow Israel to recover from the crisis without further damage. As tension gripped the nation, Shalev made his next move. On a seemingly ordinary evening, his heavily armored convoy left the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem, heading toward an undisclosed location. Surveillance cameras captured the motorcade moving through the city, its vehicles flanked by elite security forces. Then, just as the convoy entered a remote highway, it disappeared. Authorities lost all trace of the Prime Minister's movements. No security footage showed where he had gone, and satellite tracking data was mysteriously erased. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Speculation ran wild. Had he gone into hiding within Israel, protected by powerful allies? Had he boarded a private jet, escaping to a country that would refuse to extradite him? Some believed he had fled to an underground bunker, waiting for the storm to pass. Others suggested that foreign operatives had intercepted his convoy, eliminating him before he could escape. As intelligence agencies scrambled for answers, Amnesty International demanded immediate action. They urged international forces to monitor all possible escape routes, airports, border crossings, even secret tunnels that could lead to neighboring countries. But despite the global manhunt, no trace of Shalev emerged. His home was raided, his financial records scrutinized, and his communications intercepted, yet he remained unaccounted for. While some world leaders condemned the Israeli government for allegedly aiding in his disappearance, others warned that forcing the issue further could escalate into a broader geopolitical crisis. Israel's allies in the region remained largely silent, unwilling to take a definitive stance. Meanwhile, within Israel itself, public opinion was sharply divided. Some viewed Shalev's escape as an act of cowardice, proof of his guilt. Others saw him as a fugitive fighting against what they believed was an unjust international plot. In the midst of the chaos, a new theory emerged, one far more sinister than the others. What if Shalev had never intended to flee at all? What if his disappearance was not an act of escape, but an elaborate deception? As investigators combed through his digital footprint, they discovered strange inconsistencies in the leaked documents from Ghost Hand. Certain details in the emails appeared, slightly altered, as if they had been planted intentionally. A handful of cybersecurity experts suggested that some of the evidence might have been manipulated, not to clear Shalev's name, but to create an illusion of control. Had the Prime Minister orchestrated his own disappearance to manipulate the narrative? Was he setting the stage for a dramatic return, positioning himself as a victim of an international conspiracy? Or had something far darker taken place? Something that neither his allies nor his enemies had foreseen. With no concrete answers, the world was left in a state of suspense. Shalev's name dominated the news cycle, his legacy transforming from that of a feared leader to a fugitive, a ghost, a man whose fate remained unknown. And then, just when it seemed the story had reached its peak, an encrypted video surfaced online. Its origins were untraceable, its contents even more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The mystery was far from over. It was only just beginning. The world held its breath as the encrypted video spread across the internet like wildfire. No one knew who had released it or where it had come from, but one thing was certain. It featured none other than Daniel Shalev himself. The footage was grainy, as though recorded in a dimly lit room, but his voice was unmistakable. He stared directly into the camera, his face worn but composed, and began speaking in a tone that sent chills through everyone watching. According to Shalev, everything the world believed about his disappearance was a lie. He claimed that the allegations against him, the leaked emails, and even the so-called evidence presented by Amnesty International had all been part of an elaborate scheme. The real criminals, he said, were not in his administration, but among those who had called for his arrest. He insisted that the entire investigation had been a calculated effort by members of his own government, officials who had grown tired of his leadership and sought to remove him through any means necessary. He accused unnamed intelligence agencies of fabricating evidence, planting false witnesses, and manipulating the international community into believing he was a war criminal. The leaked emails? Carefully doctored. The disappearing witnesses? Either eliminated by those framing him or coerced into silence. Even Ghost Hand, the anonymous hacker whose leaks had seemingly exposed his crimes, was nothing more than a puppet of a larger operation. The real reason for his disappearance, he claimed, was that he had uncovered the plot against him and had gone into hiding to protect himself while gathering proof of his innocence. The video sent shockwaves across the world. Governments scrambled to verify its authenticity, while experts debated whether Shalev was telling the truth or weaving an intricate web of deception. His supporters, who had remained quiet since his disappearance, now had reason to rally behind him. To them, this was proof that he had been the victim all along, the target of an international conspiracy designed to dismantle his leadership. Protests erupted, demanding that the charges against him be dropped. Others, however, saw the video as nothing more than an act of desperation, a last-ditch effort by a fugitive leader trying to rewrite history. International law enforcement agencies launched an urgent search to locate Shalev, but he had left no trace. His voice had returned to the global stage, but his physical whereabouts remained unknown. Was he hiding in a foreign country under the protection of an ally? Had he gone deep underground, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface? Intelligence agencies analyzed every frame of the video, hoping to extract clues about his location, but nothing conclusive emerged. Then, a new mystery unfolded. Just days after the video's release, Ghost Hand reappeared, posting a cryptic message on a dark web forum. It was a single sentence: "The truth is deeper than anyone knows." The hacker provided no additional details, but the timing of the message was enough to reignite speculation. Did Ghost Hand possess more information that could dismantle Shalev's claims? Were they about to release another bombshell that could turn the tide once again? As global authorities struggled to separate fact from fiction, the case that had once seemed clear-cut was now a tangled mess of contradictions. If Shalev was lying, why had he risked reappearing? If he was telling the truth, who had orchestrated his downfall? And if there really was a conspiracy, how far did it go? The world was left in suspense, uncertain whether they were witnessing the desperate struggle of a guilty man evading justice or the exposure of one of the most elaborate political plots in modern history. One thing was certain: Shalev's story was not over. It was just waiting for its next chapter to be written.